Christopher, hello.
Hello.
Have you had a busy couple of weeks, a busy couple of days?
Had a very busy few weeks, in fact, yes. I mean, both in my day job, because, of course, economically, things are going to change fairly radically, I think, now Trump's got back in. But I think particularly my contacts in the US, particularly those who've served in government and in the intelligence community, are extremely concerned about the outcome of this election.
I'm thinking back to a few weeks ago when Stephanie Flanders from Bloomberg was on Newscast, and she said, the financial markets are prepared for a Trump victory. Were kind of other markets, as it were, like the one you're in, prepared for a Trump victory, or assuming it would be that way?
I think yes, because you always sort of plan for any eventuality that's likely. And I think it was always going to be 50-50 in my mind as to who came out on top. I actually thought, like a lot of people did, that it would be closer and that there'd be civil strife in the run up to the inauguration. Didn't turn out quite that way, but yes, absolutely, that the reporting we've had, intelligence in from foreign countries, China, Russia and Ukraine and others, has all been focused on what on earth will happen if Trump gets re-elected.
We'll talk about the bigger picture in a minute, but just this news story today where we now have two different stories about whether Trump and Putin spoke by phone. Who should we believe, Team Trump or Team Putin?
I think neither of them. What's interesting is actually this isn't the first time this has happened. The Bob Woodward book, which alleged that Trump and Putin had something like 6 or 7 private phone calls in recent times, was also denied, I think, by one side, although it had clearly been leaked by the other. In fact, I think Woodward said he had a source in the Trump campaign team. So I think we've got to get used to this idea that actually we're not going to see transparent or open or honest government in America, or Russia, of course, which is where it all emanates from in the first place. And it's going to be incredibly confusing and uncertain for us going forward.
Why would Russia want to deny it happened if it had happened?
There's a number of reasons why that might be true. Internal ones in terms of whether Putin is kowtowing to Trump. Also, the fact that it was reported that Trump had said that, America had strong forces in Europe and was basically threatening Putin. That might not be in Putin's interest to admit to the world and to his own people. The other thing that's going on at the moment is clearly there's an intensification of the Russian military campaign in Ukraine. And that produces two things, I think. One is that there have been, without doubt, incremental gains by Russia on the battlefield, particularly in Donbass. But secondly, the level of losses, which is the other side of the equation, if you like, are huge. I mean, Russia, according to our own chief of defence staff, is now losing and killed and wounded every day 1,500 men, whereas at the beginning of the war was losing about 200. So you're seeing a massive upsurge. This is unsustainable, actually, for Russia militarily, economically.
We'll come on to that in a second, but are you saying it could be as much about the content of this potential phone call that Putin is unhappy about being out there as the act of the phone call itself?
Yes.
And both are linked.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you deny the call, you're denying the content.
Correct.
What's in it for Team Trump to have put it out there that this call happened? What's the other side?
I think to show that they are getting down to business quickly, that they are able to take the initiative with people like Putin and Xi, presumably another one, and that they are able to sort of dictate or set the agenda for that conversation. So I think it was designed to make them look good. I suspect it did happen, but I suspect the content of it was rather different than it's been represented.
And I suppose there's just that weird thing of, I suppose it's not weird because it's constitutionally proper, but that Trump is president-elect. So he's got a status, but it's not the ultimate status yet.
Well, putting aside the fact there's this thing called the Logan Act in America, which you're probably aware of, which makes
Since today.
Well,
just explain what that is.
The Logan Act makes it illegal for somebody to run a shadow or alternative foreign policy. And it goes way back. In fact, as you probably know also, there's a book out at the moment, Craig Unger, I think, suggesting this is what happened with Reagan when he was president-elect or during his campaign, preventing the hostages in Iran being released in the run-up to the election. So I think there's a history of this, and it's quite strange that the Logan Act is being completely ignored by Trump in plain sight.
Although, is there an interpretation of the act that means actually you're allowed to have a chat, you're allowed to have a conversation with somebody, or does it forbid all contact?
No, it doesn't forbid all contact. What it forbids is policy-making contact, because, of course, we've got 2 months left of Biden. Biden and others in his administration, Lloyd Austin and so on, may decide to up their support for Ukraine, or might decide to take some other initiative surrounding Ukraine. We just don't know at the moment. So it's a pretty strange that, policy would be being discussed by Trump at this stage with the Russians.
Although I suppose that famous quote that Trump gave about solving the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 24 hours, he actually said he'd solve it in 24 hours even before he got to the Oval Office. So he was sort of like breaking the Logan Act in advance on the campaign trail, wasn't he?
Yeah, it wouldn't be the first rule he'd broken, would it?
And also the first time he's exaggerated.
Or the first law.
He's a convicted felon, yes, we mustn't forget that. Not to obsess about logistics and things, but can you imagine how a phone call between the president-elect and Putin would have been arranged or happen in the first place? And I'm just thinking, do they have each other's mobile numbers? Does anyone have Putin's number? I'm sort of exaggerating, but you see what I'm getting at. Just like the practicalities of something like this.
Well, it wouldn't be a secure call unless they use Signal or whatever, perhaps slightly secure but not fully secure, not in the way a government-to-government call would be secure. But if it's true that they've had 6 or 7 of these calls in recent times, then there must be a communications channel open between them. And I fundamentally believe that source that was talking to Bob Woodward was telling the truth. It's too bizarre a thing to make up.
And also we know from lots of other leaders, they do text each other. They do WhatsApp each other. It's just what you do when you're at that level. The same we all do.
And the problem is that if you're texting or WhatsApping an adversary, that adversary's intelligence and security services are going to try and get into your phone, get into your contacts, get into your messages, and also track you when you move about. Because as you know, if you have a mobile number that's known, you can be tracked almost anywhere you take it.
Right, let's talk about the policy implications then. Do you have any idea what Trump has got in store when it comes to Ukraine and Russia?
Not in detail terms, no. Judging by, previous things that he's done, I mean, one of the things you have to bear in mind is the deal on Afghanistan, which, although it was poorly executed by Biden, was actually set up and agreed by Trump as a way of ending a war. Not exactly parallel, but not dissimilar. The motivation anyway wasn't. But I think in this case, you've got two sides that are talking past each other. Because I think what Trump probably wants is a sort of deal, a pragmatic deal, something that he can have an easy win on and walk away from. Whereas what Putin is doing is not at all like that. Putin is looking at now his legacy. He's looking at things like the sovereignty and long-term future of Ukraine. Putin's moved from being a much more tactical leader when he started out, which is typical of an intelligence officer, to a more strategic leader now that he's looking at his legacy. He envisages himself as Catherine the Great or Peter the Great. And so I think that if Trump approaches him and offers him a deal, which is basically a sort of almost a real estate deal, you can have these bits of land if they can have that bit of land and so on, and you can have this sanction lifted in order for you to allow the Ukrainians to do X, Y, or Z. That's not going to work in my view. I don't believe that Putin can bend to that sort of deal. One of the things at the moment is that Putin has constitutionally and legally incorporated 4 oblasts, 4 regions of Ukraine into Russia, 2 of which he doesn't control on the ground. So even if you had a freeze as it is now, you would still have large parts of what Russia claims to be its territory in Ukrainian hands. And I think that's quite difficult for Putin to sell to his own people.
Newscast from the BBC.